Black women, the story of voting rights is a long one.
Hold on, I gotta go pee. I'll be back in 1 second.
Very early on, at the dawn of the 19th century, they are already at work on a political philosophy that decries racism and sexism in American politics. But constitutionally speaking, it begins with the 15th Amendment because Black women also need race to be an impermissible criteria if they're to get to the polls. Sojourner Truth is a name people might know, the former slave, anti-slavery activist, and women's rights activist. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, poet, anti-slavery lecturer.
We also have figures like Nannie Helen Burroughs. Ida B. Wells was another major activist that people don't necessarily associate with the suffrage movement, but she absolutely was.
Black women never find a very comfortable home in women's suffrage associations. Racism is always present, sometimes in very pronounced ways.
We have pictures of parades, marches, women dressed up in sort of late 19th, early 20th century Victorian gear, hats, large hats, carrying signs about votes for women. And most of these images are of white women.
The key figures are a remarkable duo of women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and those two women will take us to the 19th Amendment. In August of 1920, the state of Tennessee will, by a mere one vote, ratify the 19th Amendment, an amendment that prohibits the states from using sex as a criteria for voting, and it will become part of the Constitution, and American women win the right to vote.
So for white women, it was the end of a long fight, but for many Black women, it was just the beginning of an uphill battle to exercise those rights.
African American women are aware, but really everyone is aware, that nothing in the 19th Amendment is going to prohibit individual states from continuing to disenfranchise Black voters.
And so the first election that they had after the bill passed, the white women were going to vote, and we dressed up and went to vote. And when we got on there, well, we couldn't vote. They gave us all different kind of excuses why. We just stayed. We asked, we wanted to know why we couldn't vote, and the answers to the questions were so invalid, we were not satisfied. So finally one woman, Mrs. Simmons, said, "Are you saying that we can't vote because we are Negroes?" And he said, "Yes, Negroes don't vote in primary in Texas." So that just hurt our hearts real bad.
And so the 19th Amendment, even as we mark this anniversary, it leaves many, many American women to continue the struggle for political rights, including the vote. And African American women are one chapter or one facet of that story. There's nothing in the 19th Amendment that guarantees Chinese immigrant women the vote. There's nothing in the 19th Amendment that guarantees to Native American women the vote. Latinx women, particularly Mexican American women, also occupy an ambiguous place in the story of voting rights. For Black women, the right to vote is symbolic, and that's not to diminish symbolism. It's to say that the right to vote is a sign that they are full and equal citizens of the United States. African American women are facing the challenges of racial violence, lynching, and access to the polls. African American women are looking at a range of inequalities, economic inequalities, housing inequalities, health inequalities, educational inequalities. And access to the ballot is a lever in those struggles. It is the gateway to sitting on juries. It is the gateway to office holding. Black women have an agenda, and it is an ambitious one, and one that they hope the vote will help them further.
It wasn't easy to try to get people to come out to go and try to register to vote, because the first time that we went, we had a circle around the courthouse of pickup trucks and rifles and white people getting ready to stop us. Only 4 people got in that whole day.
What did the white people have to fear from so many blacks registering?
If they became a registered voter, many of the blacks would seek positions in the political field. They would be out. They would fight for justice if they were registered voters. They would turn the city completely around. And that is the reason why they did not want to see black people become registered voters.
What black women want in the wake of the 19th Amendment is federal legislation that will now protect their voting rights, to impose on those states with a history of disenfranchising black voters an extra requirement. And black women will wage a campaign that will take them all the way to 1965 and passage of the Voting Rights Act in that year. It's important to say that winning the Voting Rights Act is a brutal, brutal campaign. Black Americans, women and men, put their lives on the line in too many southern jurisdictions in order to force the hand of Congress, to force the hand of Lyndon Johnson to win voting rights legislation. This is not an easy road for African American women. It is a harrowing road, but it is indeed a victory, one that black women had been looking for nearly half a century.
I know that
Can I ask a serious question? Why is my Twitch chat of pasty little fucking nerds who only play video games freaking the fuck out over the NBA boycotting games right now? Like, do any of you actually watch? Are you guys like LARPing as NBA sports weebs or something? I thought this was a sports free space where we could be safe from the annoying normies who watch sports and only talk about sports. There's a strike, not a boycott. They're refusing to do the labor. Okay, regardless, boycott, strike, doesn't matter. Good news. I'm glad that they're doing something about it. I'm glad that they're criticizing the American government. I'm glad that they're doing it, but I don't know what else you want from me. I don't know what else you want me to say about it. Like, I'm happy about the boycotts or the strike. That's great. But if you think that we're going to normalize watching sports on here, then you got another thing coming for you.
my grandmother raised my mother that they always had to vote. Like, it was something that she was born in.
My grandmother, Susie Jones, her portrait hangs on the wall, and I am very accountable to her, even as she passed many years ago. People ask me, why do we need to know this history? Today, we live in an era of voter suppression, laws that are neutral on their face, voter ID requirements, or the purging of voter rolls, or the shuttering of polling places, none of which announce that they are aimed at keeping voters of color, women of color from the polls. But when we look at those laws in practice, we can recognize that, like in 1920, in 2020, seemingly neutral laws are being used to disproportionately keep people of color away from the polls.
By running for political office and affecting change on the ground in their communities, in their states. So we now have black women running for governorships, and we have a number of African Americans that we've seen has shaped elections. So I think the idea of enfranchisement is also expanded to not just being able to vote, but exercising political power and exercising political agency. And I think that's the legacy of the suffrage movement.
To me, these are not women who dropped out of the sky. These are women who come out of a political tradition and are building upon that, and will tell you that if you ask them.
These women and the generations that followed worked to make democracy and opportunity real in the lives of all of us who followed.
Fantasy. Are you coming with me? Feed my fantasy.